Well, hello, folks. I'm glad to see you here. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to show some photos from Lisbon that I took recently and talk about 3 articles that I read this morning before I got out of bed, all of which I think are quite interesting and helpful for you to understand what's going on in the world today. Um, Also, I have a couple book recommendations, 2 books I've been recommending for a while, and I'll put those links in the show notes so that you can read the articles for yourself and hopefully read the books that I'm recommending. At the end of the day, if you read books by authors who read books, good books, you might learn something about how the world really works. Okay, so here we go. Thanks again. So, I'm going to quote some articles here that I looked at. To my mind, there's a lot of interesting things out there. And simply complaining about old conspiracies and new wineskins is kind of silly. We don't need a conspiracy to run into hazards and problems. I mean, they will meet us one way or another. So, friends of mine on WhatsApp sent me Twitter threads where they suggest I watch very special geniuses like myself, wink wink, pontificate on old conspiracies and new wineskins. We use current events like scapegoats, and all of us think that we are the best critical thinkers you ever saw simply because we can parrot the goings-on the tubes and in social media threads. Back in the day, plebs and proles were perhaps mildly concerned about what elites were up to. Food and entertainment provided, of course, until they were called on to fight. And of course, when that happened, they had God. Today, we all think we know what's going on with our much admired elite players because we have gotten in the habit of absorbing and identifying with their public relations, their PR, their propaganda, their marketing, their sales, their business development, their ideologies, neoliberalism, global capital, financialization, all these wonderful things. Consumerism, of course, and we play our part, as we must, because we were brought up in this thing. So a lot of what Burnham talks about in The Suicide of the West, or whatever it's called, makes total sense, because we are brought up in a milieu, in a culture where we learn things, and then we take those things that we learned growing up for granted. And very few of us really try to fight our way out of that paper bag. Well, we may not be able to imagine God, but still, we can aspire to be sociopathic con men like Elon, Joe, and Donald. And as we watch wars unfold on the tubes, each one of us thinks he's the greatest warrior since Achilles. It's really easy to watch wars on TV for some people and feel, well, I was born on this side and I'm righteous, and the other side is just the enemy. To dehumanize and to be cheerleaders for ongoing, horrific, ridiculous, absurd destruction. And we all have good reasons to support the wars. We're given them day in and day out, and we adopt them as our own so that we fit in to the narrative, so that we can claim the side of good and righteousness over the side of evil. Well, I always ask my friends to read the classics. I've done that for decades. And when Nicholas Nassim Taleb writes about that on his Medium account, I send them his article. See, even the super smart math guys think the classics are good medicine. Aren't I great? I reference Nicholas Nassim Taleb. And I've read his books, some of them thrice. But reading books by a guy with a considerable library and reading good books multiple times doesn't make me intelligent, wise, or holy. That project is ongoing, and I am doomed to fail. If I could live 1,000 years, I'd get bored before I achieved anything like that trinity of qualities. I can only boast an earnest curiosity that both amuses and befuddles me. So, with your kind patience and consideration, let's look at a few articles I read before peeling myself out of bed this morning. Well, you guys know I'm a fan of Chris Hedges. Yeah, well, he's a social critic and he goes against the grain and so on. And I'm sure that just upsets people because it makes you think. And you don't need to think about stuff you don't want to think about. And sometimes social critics make us think about things we don't want to think about. So they're no fun. So his piece is called "The Politicians Who Destroyed Our Democracy Want Us to Vote for Them to Save It." So you guys all voted. Good for you. You did your civic duty. Bravo. Let's see how your choices pan out over the next 2 years before they're voted in or out or whatever. Let's see who they serve. Anyway, some quotes from this scorching piece. He starts with this: "The bipartisan project of dismantling our democracy, which took place over the last few decades on behalf of corporations and the rich, has left only the outward shell of democracy. The courts, legislative bodies, the executive branch, and the media, including public broadcasting, are captive to corporate power. There is no institution that can be considered authentically democratic. The corporate coup d'etat is over. They won. We lost. The wreckage of this neoliberal project is appalling. Endless and futile wars to enrich a military-industrial complex that bleeds the U.S. Treasury of half of all discretionary spending. Deindustrialization that has turned the U.S. cities into decaying ruins. The slashing and privatization of social programs, including education, utility services, and health care, which saw over 1 million Americans account for 1/5 of global deaths from COVID, although we are 4% of the world's population. Draconian forms of social control, embodied in militarized police, functioning as lethal armies of occupation in poor urban areas. The largest prison system in the world, a virtual tax boycott by the richest individuals and corporations, money-saturated elections that perpetuate our system of legalized bribery, and the most intrusive state surveillance of the citizenry in our history." Unquote. Christopher Hedges writing. He then quotes Gore Vidal. I've resorted to this quote many times over the decades. Bully for me. Anyway, Gore Vidal said, "The United States of amnesia. Hear, hear." I can't imagine that anyone can remember anything that happened 4 years ago. You talk about 2014 in Ukraine. I don't think anyone knows what happened in 2014 in Ukraine. So even the exiting of Afghanistan and the whole 20 years of the war there, I doubt people even have that anywhere in their brain. So we are the United States of amnesia, that's for sure. Then, after mentioning a dozen defunct empires and their demise, Chris Hedges says this: quote, "These political deformities play the role of the Snopes clan in William Faulkner's trilogy, The Hamlet, The Town, and The Mansion. The Snopeses wrestled control in the South from a degenerate aristocratic elite. Flem Snopes and his extended family, which includes a killer, a pedophile, a bigamist, an arsonist, a mentally disabled man who copulates with a cow, and a relative who sells tickets to witness the bestiality, are fictional representatives of the scum that hijacked the Republican Party." Ooh, that's me commenting here. Ouch. So continuing with the quote, he's quoting someone else here. Quote, "The usual reference to amorality, while accurate, is not sufficiently distinctive and by itself does not allow us to place them as they should be placed in a historical moment." The critic Irvin Howe wrote of the Snopeses, "Perhaps the most important thing to be said is that they are what comes afterwards, the creatures that emerge from the devastation with the slime still upon their lips." Unquote. And then it continues, quote, "Let a world collapse in the South or Russia, and there will appear figures of coarse ambition driving their way up from beneath the social bottom, men to whom moral claims are not so much absurd as incomprehensible, sons of bushwhackers or musiks drifting in from nowhere and taking over through the sheer outrageousness of their monolithic force," Howe wrote. Continuing Howe's quote, "They become presidents of local banks and chairmen of the party regional committees, and later, a trifle slicked up, they muscle their way into Congress or the Politburo, scavengers without inhibition. They need not believe in the crumbling official code of their society. They need only learn to mimic its sounds." Unquote from Howe there. Then Hedges continues, "Biden and other establishment politicians are not actually calling for democracy. They're calling for civility. They have no intention of extracting the knife thrust into our backs. They hope to paper over the rot and the pain with the decorum of the polite, measured talk they use to sell us the con of neoliberalism. The political correctness and inclusivity imposed by college-educated elites, unfortunately, has now become associated with the corporate assault, as if a woman CEO or a black police officer is going to mitigate the exploitation and abuse. Minorities are always welcome, as they were in other species of colonialism, if they serve the dictates of the masters. This is how Barack Obama, whom Cornel West called a black mascot for Wall Street, became president." Unquote. We're off of Chris Hedges now, and I just want to say, ouch! Man, he can be acerbic sometimes. Lacerated tongue there. Dangerous, sharp. At the end, it's like, continuing with Chris here, he says, "America will descend into a Viktor Orban type of authoritarianism without profound political, social, and economic reform." And I wouldn't doubt that. I'm always talking to people about, well, yeah, we're voting, we're doing whatever we can, and so on and so forth. But the culture has to change. And the foundations of it run deep. And they go back a long ways. So if you didn't study your political philosophy, starting back, I'd say, going, back to the classics, of course, but in particular, the age of reason and American Revolution and the French Revolution and moving into the Industrial Revolution and the Information Age and all that. If you didn't look into de Tocqueville and John Stuart Mill and all those people, not just the Western ones, but even, looking into what people thought in China back in the 19th century or whatever, you have no clue, right, just how deeply this is embedded in us. And then after World War II in particular, it's very interesting to see how things developed and how much we've been indoctrinated in this, U.S. security umbrella, U.S. hegemon, the dollar, and all that kind of thing, which is kind of dictating the way the world goes, whether we like it or not. And the final judgment, which Chris Hedges pronounces, I guess, he says, we should have walked out on the Democratic Party when we still had a chance. Amen to that. Now, what I didn't read, you should read the article. I really hope you will, and think about it deeply, is he talks about Joe Biden and his record and what he stands for. So, you've got the Republicans and the Democrats, and both of them are not answers to what's ailing us. Now, if you think something's ailing us now, and if you don't, that's fine. Just ignore all this as you will, and, continue on as before. But if you think that we're facing some dire challenges that need to be looked at, and you know what they are from my point of view, I'm looking at inequality, I'm looking at culture, values, morals, ethics, I'm looking at neoliberalism, how capitalism affects the environment, how capitalism affects culture, and I've recommended a couple good books on that, which I hope you'll read, and I'll put them in the show notes of this video to remind you anyway. So that's one article, so I know I'm going on and on, but let's just go a couple more if you will. So another article I was reading this morning was, let's be clear, if World War III happens, it will be the result of choices made by the U.S. empire, by Caitlin Johnstone, who's an Australian writer who lives in the States. And she's becoming more and more read. She started off, I don't know her total background, but I was reading her on Medium, and now she has Substack. And she's getting quoted by a lot of other journalists and writers who I think are earnest, sincere, and good, doing a good job. So anyway, here's what she has to say, just parts of her article that I hope you'll read as well. It's an important perspective to have, even if you're totally gung-ho on destroying Russia and all of Russia and whatever. I mean, there's a big con job going on where we have to support all these wars as if there really are existential threats out there. And people would rather go on and on about masks and freedom and restrictions during a pandemic rather than facing the structural, systemic, cultural, sociological, philosophical, and, systemic issues, because that's too complicated. It's too difficult. But it's a lot easier just to scapegoat wearing masks or something, come up with an old conspiracy, regurgitate that, dress it up in a new wrapper, and then pretend like it's some scoop, something new. It isn't. So anyway, this is what she says. The commander of the U.S. nuclear arsenal has stated unequivocally that the war in Ukraine is just a warm-up exercise for a much larger conflict that's already in the mail. Wow. That's me talking. Wow. Anyway, Dave DeCamp reports The commander that oversees U.S. nuclear forces delivered an ominous warning at a naval conference last week by calling the war in Ukraine a warm-up for the big one that is to come. This Ukraine crisis that we're in right now, this is just the warm-up, said Navy Admiral Charles Richard, the commander of the U.S. Strategic Command. Continuing with the quote, "The big one is coming, and it isn't going to be very long before we're going to get tested in ways that we haven't been tested in for a long time." So this is Dr. Strangelove stuff going on, man. I mean, go watch that movie. This is totally Dr. Strangelove. So continuing with Caitlin's writing here, I'm quoting her. Richard's warning came after the U.S. released its new nuclear posture review, NPR, isn't that ironic, which reaffirms that the U.S. doctrine allows for the first use of nuclear weapons. The review says that the purpose of the U.S. nuclear arsenal is to deter strategic attacks, assure allies and partners, and achieve U.S. objectives if deterrence fails. Unquote. Wow. So there you have it. That's why we need, I'm talking now, that's why we need these supersonic missiles and everything so that they can become a very effective first strike thing. And then we wonder why countries around the world are a little bit concerned, about what's going on. And as I've often said, you don't want Uncle Sam coming in to help you because he will wreck everything in your culture, in your world, and take whatever he can get before he finally abandons you to a legacy of authoritarianism and, economic meltdown. Not since World War II, the Marshall Plan, and sorting out Japan after we nuked it, has the United States been really useful to anyone other than, business models and iPhones and cool stuff like that, which people around the world tend to like. And there are other things to like also. Noam Chomsky always defers to the fact that we live in a relatively free society where people can talk and do things, and that's still true. Anyway, sorry for the dilly-dally. I'll go back to Caitlin's work now. Not only does Richard appear to believe that a hot war between major world powers is a foregone conclusion, he has also previously stated that a nuclear war with Russia or China is now a very real possibility. Again, this is not some armchair warrior opining from his desk at a corporate newspaper or DC think tank. This is the head of Stratcom. Richard would be personally overseeing the very warfare he's talking about. What I find most striking about remarks like these is how passive they always make it sound. Richard talks about the big one like other people talk about California earthquakes, as though a hot war with China would be some kind of natural disaster that just happened out of nowhere. This type of rhetoric is becoming more and more common, describing an atomic age world war as something that would happen to the U.S. empire rather than the direct result of concrete A or B decisions made by the empire, is becoming its own genre of foreign policy punditry. This passive oopsie-poopsie narrative overlay that's placed atop the U.S. empire's militarism is nothing new. Back in 2017, Fair.org's Adam Johnson documented the way Western media are always describing the United States as stumbling into wars and getting sucked into military interventions, like a cheating spouse making up bad excuses after getting caught. This framing serves to flatter two sensibilities, one right and one vaguely left. It satisfies the right-wing nationalist idea that America only goes to war because it's compelled to by forces outside of its own control. The reluctant warrior, the gentle giant who will only attack when provoked to do so. But it also plays into a nominally liberal hipster notion that the U.S. military is actually incompetent and boobish, and in general, bad at war making. So that was a quote that Caitlin quoted of the Adam Johnson. And, come on. You see it all the time, right? And even intellectual influencers like Sam Harris and count them, always tend to default to the idea that the West, whatever the heck that is, America basically, is, and in reality, the dog whistling, Christian nationalist America is, and Sam Harris is a Christian, even if he doesn't know he is. I mean, Jordan Peterson said that, so it's obviously true. Anyway, I'm kind of kidding here. But there's always this default position that if we do something, there are good reasons behind it. And our reasons are better than most people's reasons around the world. And that's just blatantly fallacious logic and ridiculous. There are other ways things can be done. There are other cultures in the world. So, thinking that we're just ever so righteous all the time is ridiculous. All right, I'll end with, that's my end of her article there. I hope you read it. And the next one is Frida Berringen, and this was, I picked up through Tom Dispatch. And Tom was saying, living in a tipping point world, how to survive us. So her article's entitled Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow on a Broiling Planet by Frida Berringen. And she posted this on November 6, 2022. So now I'm quoting her from her article. But it would prove to be just the beginning of an arms race and a cheapening of life that goes on to this day. After all, this country continues to modernize its nuclear arsenal to the tune of trillions of dollars, while Vladimir Putin has threatened to use one or more of his vast store of tactical nukes. And the Chinese are rushing to catch up. I keep thinking about how 77 years of nuclear brinksmanship and impending doom has taken its global toll, even while making life more precarious and helping render this beautiful and complex planet a garbage can for forever radioactive waste. Okay, hyperbole alert. It's not forever, just literally a million years. William T. here. I've often talked about, what are we going to do with the nuclear waste? We have to figure that out before we just start thinking that nuclear power is a panacea. And we have to think about what we're going to do with all the nuclear waste and the weapons we've made over the decades. Anyway, nobody's talking about that. How do we shut it down even if we wanted to? I don't know. What would replace that energy? I don't know. So I'm continuing with the article now, quoting the article. She's talking about President Jimmy Carter. We love Carter now for his folksy accessibility, moral stamina, and promotion of affordable housing through Habitat for Humanity. But as we doom scroll the latest news about present and future climate catastrophes, we have to reach back through time to even imagine a healthier tomorrow. Sadly enough, with Carter, we might have been near a turning point. We might have had a chance. And then actor and huckster Ronald Reagan rode his 10-gallon cowboy hat into the White House, removed the rooftop solar panels that the Carters had installed, instituted tax cuts for the very wealthy, and loosened regulations on every type of polluter. President Reagan did that in 1986, only a year or so after the last month of our era that the planet was cooler than average. Now, I'm talking now, William T. here. I'm not going to talk about climate deniers climate crisis deniers, because I've already done that in another video, and I think they're just stubbornly, willfully ignorant. And they want to spit in your face with their ignorance and tell you that you're just stupid to think there's a problem. Well, they will find out there's a problem sooner than later. Anyway, going on with the article. 3 of the biggest tipping point things, that's what she's talking about now. 3 of the biggest ones that climate scientists agree we're close to tipping over are: 1, the collapse of Greenland's ice cap, which will produce a huge rise in global sea levels. 2, the collapse of a key current in the North Atlantic Ocean, which will further disrupt rainfall and weather patterns throughout the world, severely curtailing global food production. Now I'm talking William T. here. I am so sick of getting messages from people on WhatsApp about the weather. Oh, there's a cold front that's going to hit the United States. What happened to global warming? I don't want to see any more snow fights in Congress. I'd rather not see Congress at all than morons throwing snowballs at each other, denying that there's a climate crisis. Okay, back to the article. The third tipping point she mentions is, number 3, the melting of the Arctic's carbon-rich permafrost, releasing staggering amounts of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, and so further broiling this planet. And then parenthetically, will it freeze again if we do the right thing? Not likely, as it seems as if that tipping point has already tipped. Well, I was trying to explain to a friend a few days ago that, these tipping points actually started tipping a long time ago. It's just that we don't notice them until it's so late that we already have mass starvation. And we said, oh, we must have crossed a tipping point. Because a tipping point isn't one, nanosecond in time. It's a period of time over which things are changing at a rapid rate, more rapidly than the usual geological timescale of change, right? It's just happening because the apex predator, Homo sapiens, are here monkeying with everything, with billions of years of things, carbon sequestration and the turning of carbon life forms into oil and gas and so on. I mean, we release that energy. We use that energy very quickly over the course of, just a couple hundred years. And it's unprecedented in the history of the Earth that anything like this could happen. We made it happen. We pulled that energy out of the ground and made it happen. Civilization is a heat engine. Again, I'd refer on the risk thing to Schmachtenberger and his projects, and I'd say Nate Hagen is a great guy to refer to in terms of the energy thing if you don't want to read Vaclav Smil and a whole bunch of other more complicated authors. He's a teacher, and he can teach you in a common language without sounding too crazy and complicated. Anyway, here I go. I'm going back to the article now. So she continues, in the face of all this, in the age of Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Elon Musk, and the rest of the crew, how do you change political or corporate behavior to slow, if not reverse, global warming? More than 3/4 of a century of uncertain tomorrows has made the human race our health, the health of our environment, and the health of other life forms on the planet that we share with. And we need these things, the complicated interwoven protein forms and carbon forms, to survive. Unfortunately, if we don't realize that, then we're just plain stupid. Come on, we can do better than that, can't we? Anyway, tipping points you don't want to believe, they're happening right now, and they've been happening for years. Well, that's fine. Volunteer, save the whales, help the homeless, contribute to pet shelters. Heck, you've already voted, right? So you've done your civic duty. The future is in the leaders you voted for now. The future is in the hands of the corporate bosses, with the hedge fund guys and the corporate raiders, the financialized world and all of their service providers, the lawyers, the consultants, the syndicators, the traders, the markets. So just sit back and see what happens. Let's just wait and see what the players do for us. I think you're going to find out it's kind of a bummer. Or you could organize and put a few hours a month into communicating with people in your community and trying to figure out a system and a culture that would avert these looming catastrophes. And you have to do that in relationship with people that you talk to face, and that you work hard with shoulder to shoulder and make mistakes with. You dirty, stinking, fallible human beings. And, changing culture is the hardest thing I can think of doing. But if millions of us don't do it right now, I believe we will be very disappointed very soon. But, really, why bother to regurgitate the obvious? I mean, who the heck am I anyway? Just another numbskull who thinks he wants to put videos on the tubes? Am I shouldering my share of the burden, or just babbling in the wind? Well, folks, my friends, Folk and Flick, my viewers, listeners, people who have supported me, the few of you that there are, trust me, nothing can disappoint me more than myself. So I head into the latter years of my life being fortunate enough to have lived this long, when most 90% or 92% of the world, of people in the world, never live as long as I've lived. And all I can be is thankful and hopeful. And I don't know what bit I'm going to do, but it just sometimes breaks my heart when I see people paying attention to distractions and diversions, when I would hope they would be sitting down with groups of people in their communities and trying to sort out, the science, the philosophy, the culture. We don't go to culture wars. That's a waste of time. It's a red herring. What we have to do is heal the culture, and we have to invent a new one, because our technologies now have brought us into a new world, and it's not like the old world. I mean, we're still human beings, but things have changed. Whatever you want to conserve from the classics, from the good books, we can easily take those into the future. Those books and ideas will be considered and read again and again and again, hundreds of years from now, thousands of years from now, if we survive. But if we wreck our habitat, then our civilization is finished, and we can forget about, our Orthodox theology, or our Buddhist contemplation, or our getting rich, right? And at the end of the day, we have to consider what growth means, and growth in a very different sense than just growing the shit that we can buy. Another thing somebody alluded to today, but I forgot where I saw it, was Martin Luther King, he was talking about, we've gone from a culture that was about people to a culture that's about things. And that's not good at all. So what happens to people like Martin Luther King or Jimmy Carter? They get ignored or they get killed because we tend to gravitate towards power, towards the players, towards the game, even if it doesn't serve us. So when you're called up, or when you're asked to volunteer or to join the army, or when Putin just grabs you off the street or takes you out of prison and turns you into cannon fodder, you didn't have any power. You were hopeless, powerless, clueless, and you were just hanging in there to see what happened. And then you got called up, and then you got vaporized by a explosive shell. And we all think there are good reasons for it. Nagasaki, Hiroshima, good reasons for it. Well, there you go. History rhymes, but it doesn't have to be a grotesque rap song full of expletives and nasty language, demeaning. It can be something better. It can be the kind of poetry that has inspired people for generations. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. Buliam T. Out.